And that's why I didn't admit you. I just wrote you an email. So welcome, Lindsay.
Thank you.
And I'm going to wait for a few more minutes, and then we'll turn it over for some quick hellos and meet and greets. There's going to be quite a few people coming in. So we have already a nice crowd. And
I'm going to go turn on my AC because I'm in the hot San Fernando Valley and I'm feeling it already. I'll be right back.
Okay. Hi, Miriam. Hi, Mark.
Hi.
Mark, it was a pleasure to meet you finally. I know you all from the virtual world, and it's great to see pictures of you. I wish I was able to shake hands and hugs, but this is the best we have.
That'll come too someday.
Oh, there you are. Hello.
Okay, and Fred, I see you coming. So we have 14 people on board already. So wait a second. So let me see. And there's more coming in. We're going to have more than one screen here, which is terrific.
Wow.
I'm really encouraged with the amount of vibes that I've got. So hello, Lori.
How do I get the multi-screen?
What do you mean the multi-screen? You won't get it. You should go up in the top of corner. There's something called view, and you want to switch to gallery view. Fred, I'm here. I think that's who's talking. And you toggle on to gallery view, and then you'll be able to have an arrow that'll go on both right and left of your screens, and you'll be able to toggle back and forth so that you can see screens. So hello, everyone. Hey, Eva, how are you? So
I'm
nice
good,
to see
thank you. Hi, Jeffrey. Hello, everyone.
And I always say that when I hear Eva's voice, Eva sounds just like my mom. She makes me so emotional every single time I hear her. That's how, so if you say a few more words, Eva, to the group, you'll know how my mom talks. And you can plug your book, Eva, so I can hear you talk.
Oh, thank you. But I just want to mention, and your mom's name was also Eva.
Yeah.
She was Eva.
She was always, but she used it. She said Eva.
She said Eva, and I say Eva.
Yeah.
I say potato.
And I'm sorry, what did you say about the book?
I said, if you want to tell people about your book, so I can hear more of you, so I can get warm to my mom. Fred, get on the video, and Hetty the same, and Ruth the same, please.
Hi.
I'm not on the video.
I'm trying.
No.
I'm trying.
So prior to the pandemic, I published a memoir about my parents, and the title is Hidden Recipes. It's a Holocaust memoir. My mother was in Auschwitz, where my grandparents were murdered. And from Auschwitz, she and her younger sister were sent to a forced labor camp in Germany, Hesse-Schlichtenau, where she was able to pilfer paper and a small pencil and write recipes in secret. And this is what helped these women to survive, they formed they had a social network, and they talked about food a lot because they were starving. So I published this Hidden Recipes memoir.
And I want to tell everyone that Ava's going to present her book in a presentation we have scheduled on January 19th. So you can hear about Ava's book then. And so you see, we have a huge crowd, and Fred makes a great point. For you to be able to see everyone, up on the top corner of your Zoom screen is a thing called View. And you want to make sure that if you want to see everybody, you see that you can use Gallery View. If you want to see just the speaker speaking, you can change that to Speaker View. So we have a lot of people coming in, which is great. We have a great audience today, and I think we really have an exciting program. you all came on a little early, so I want to have you, Dana, introduce yourself, have Deborah introduce herself, and Lindsay introduce herselves now. Thank you. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Dr. Dana Schrager, Dana Levin Schrager, and happy you all are here today. And we're going to talk about a really important topic, understanding the psychological aftermath of the Holocaust. And first, we're going to have a panel of speakers. And then in the second hour, there's going to be an opportunity for audience participation. So as the panel's talking, I want you all to think about if you would like to share a brief story of how this topic applies to you, how in the aftermath of the Holocaust, how it might have affected your parent or grandparent emotionally, and how you think it affects you, and what you think you've been able to do to help process and help heal the trauma. And the presentation is about really a message of hope that that we can heal this trauma and move forward from what happened to our relatives.
Okay, and I'll toss it over to Deborah.
Hi, I'm Dr. Deborah Boris, also a psychologist and also a second generation. Looking forward to being a part of the panel from both of those roles.
And Lindsay.
Hi there, I'm Lindsay Sobrano Wilson, and I'm the granddaughter of Holocaust survivors. I'm a poet, a teacher, and an editor, and I'm happy to be here today and talk a little bit about how I use writing as a means of therapy.
Perfect. Okay, and we are about 2 minutes away, and I have people coming in. It is an amazing number of people with us today. So all of you who are coming in, I want you to know, to be able to see everybody, if you go up to the top corner of your Zoom screen, you'll see there's a little button marked View. And if you open that, click on that button, you'll be able to see some different options. You can see a gallery view. And if you click on that, you'll be able to see everybody in, and you'll see right now we have 3 pages of people on board, which is fabulous. And you'll be able to toggle on the right and the left to go back and forth. And that'll be especially helpful when we open up the second half of the discussion. I want to get started now. We'll start a little early, and I'll just keep admitting people as we go. I'm Jeffery Giesener. I founded the group in the Jewish Culture and Holocaust Remembrance on behalf of both of my survivor parents, my mother from Auschwitz, my father escaped Nazi Germany at 15, and both of them have long passed. And I opened it to honor them and to bring Jewish culture and to use this Facebook digital platform to educate in new ways around Holocaust and the Shoah, and to use hope and bring hope to the way to educate. And all of you are helping us do that, which is an exciting time. I also want to point out some technical things for us. Obviously, we're on Zoom. And so if you lose your connection, all you have to do is, hit the link again. I will see it. I'm monitoring all of the admin side of this. I'll readmit you. I also want to go over some tools that we're going to use today that are really important. You'll notice under the reactions on the bottom part of your toolbar, if you're using a PC or your tablet, I want you to, as I'm doing right now, you'll see that I have clicked on the button called Raise Your Hand. So I want everyone right now to try to raise their hand, because it's going to be important so that when I see you raise your hand, it'll open up for a question, and I will be able to see you and be able to call on you. Hi, Ava. And you're going to be part of my story today. So that's going to be, I'm glad you're on board with us. So all you have to do is lower your hand now, and you can then take it away. You can raise your hand and lower your hand as many times as you'd like during the program. We have a great opportunity for you to speak. Also, I'm going to at some point at this, when we start, mute you all so that we don't have any background noise or anything like that. But as you want to raise your hand, I want you to unmute yourself so we can hear you. And I'm not going to call on Saul, but Saul, no, you know I'm talking to you. So hi, Saul. So I think that's pretty much what we need to do. Also, I want to talk to you about chat. There's a chat function under the More. You'll see there chats, and someone asked how much time we have today. Well, this is a 2-hour block of time. Obviously, if you need to leave earlier, that's fine. If you want to, we're going to go until 12:15 Pacific time today, so we have a little bit extra to go overrun. So if you have a question to me or anybody in the group, you can use chat and write. If you see there, it says everyone, but you also can pick a specific person. If you toggle on the everyone, you'll notice you can write a message to anybody or everyone. And I'll be using the chat function to send you some messages as well. Okay, so I first want to get started by, we are all in this together, and I'd love to make some introductions. There's just too many people, which is a great thing to introduce everyone personally. So I want to use the raise your hand, and I want to see if anybody is coming from outside of the United States here today. So please raise your hand and let us know. Arnold is right. Arnold, you need, okay. And let's see who else is coming out from outside of the United States. Is there anybody else? Okay, I don't think so. How many are coming from the East Coast of the United States? What's that?
There's a few from more.
Yeah, hi. I saw that. Where did you go? There's Naomi. Samuel, how are you? Samuel, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, and where are you calling? Where are you zooming in from? Say it again.
I'm zooming in. I'm zooming in from Bali.
Bali.
Uganda.
Okay. Nice of you. Welcome. Terrific. Any other from outside? We know Lindsay's from Ottawa. Anybody outside of the country?
Yes, I'm in Montreal.
I'm in Montreal. Okay, just speak. Go ahead. Anybody else?
I'm in Rehovot, Israel.
Oh, terrific. Welcome. Anybody else? One at a time.
I'm from Curitiba, Brazil.
Brazil. Hi. Nice to meet you finally. So glad to see you. And who else? Anybody else? Esther?
I'm from Canmore, Alberta, newly.
Oh, you just moved. Terrific.
I've just moved.
And Esther will be. And Esther, I want to just point out, Esther is Esther Gilbert. She is the widow, unfortunately, of Sir Martin Gilbert, the famed historian and writer. And Esther will be providing a program to our group in December. So we're excited to have Esther with us. And Esther, you can see firsthand what's going on here. So that's terrific.
Terrific. I'm happy to be part of this.
All right, terrific. Anybody else out of the country?
Yes. Hi, Eddie Brownwatch.
Where?
I'm from Jerusalem.
Jerusalem, Hetty, terrific. How is Jerusalem today?
I haven't been outside yet.
Okay.
But it's gorgeous this time of year.
All right. Anybody from the Europe or the UK, EU? No. All right. That's terrific. How many from the East Coast? Raise hands.
Not already.
Those who have raised hands, take hands down, and those who are from the East Coast. Okay. How many from the Central Time Zone? Anybody from the Mountain Time Zone? And again, you can use your gallery view and scan back and forth. Anybody, and we obviously have the Pacific Time Zone, which I'm from San Diego, and Dana's from Los Angeles, and Deborah is from Los Angeles. So I'm going to start off the program. I'm going to share my screen. We have something to present today, and I'm pretty excited about this. So we've just experienced, hold on a second. Give me 1 second. Clear this out of here. Okay, so we just experienced the high holidays and we start anew. So I sourced this music. It doesn't have anything to do with this program, but it does have everything to do about being Jewish. So I'm going to take 3 minutes and just
Yeah, I'm just trying to figure out. Hopefully, yes.
sorry.
Does this work? Emma? Electrical permit.
So, as the start of our premiere of our second season, I'm so happy to welcome all of you. And we, in our group, the Jewish Culture and Holocaust Remembrance, begin again. I also want to introduce now our participants who are running the panel for our program today. We have Dr. Dana Levin Schrager, who's a clinical psychologist who's helped clients in psychotherapy for over 25 years in Los Angeles, California. Her specialties include generational trauma, midlife growth, and learning issues. Currently, Dana is on sabbatical writing 3 books. One of them is Intergenerationally Transmitted Trauma. The book is part personal journey and part guidance for healing and inherited trauma. In addition, Dana is an avid home cook and recipe blogger She's amazing because she shares ideas for making Jewish holidays more delicious and fun, and meeting in her lively Facebook Jewish holiday cooking group. She runs the second cooking group, which totals over 20,000 followers. I'm a member of both of Dana's groups. She sees her groups as a place to connect to others and to celebrate life through Jewish cooking. Also, Dana is a second generation survivor. Dr. Deborah Broys is a clinical Boris. How do you pronounce it? I'm sorry, Deb.
Boris.
Boris, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Is a clinical and forensic psychologist specializing in patient treatment and expert witness evaluation and testimony regarding victimizations and trauma. She's been in practice in LA for over 30 years. She received her doctorate in clinical psychology from UCLA Department of Psychology. She's also a fellow in forensic psychology with the American Board of Forensic Psychology. Deborah's deceased father, Jack, along with his older brother, Ben, and surviving brother, Morris, were the only members of their Polish family to emerge from the Shoah alive. They survived several concentration camps together, including Auschwitz. Okay, and the last, but certainly not least, is Lindsay Sobrano Wilson. Lindsay is a poet, teacher, and editor who lives in Toronto, Ontario. Her debut chapbook, Casa de Mi Corazon, a travel journal of poetry and memoir, is Poetica Publishing, is a story of Jewish Canadian women on an inner and outer journey to find home. As a granddaughter of a Spanish Moroccan immigrants and a Romanian Holocaust survivors, she travels to Israel and Europe frequently to explore her roots, to discover that home is where the heart is. She holds an MA in English literature. Okay, so there you go. Now you know a little bit about who's going to be presenting, and I'll give it over to Dana to, as moderator of the panel, to begin.
Hello, everyone. Jeffrey, are you going to show the trailer to Generations Apart today?
You're right. Thank you for that.
Do you want to do that now or
Yep,
later?
I'm doing it now.
Okay.
Thank you, Dan. Okay, and this trailer, I think is directly on point. So we're going to play this trailer. The movie is actually a documentary film called A Generations Apart. And we're going to play that now.
One thing that all those years bothers me, I never will know that how my mother really when she died.
I've known about the concentration camps as long as I can remember. But I can honestly say I never used to think much.
At first you just hear it, it's just a story, and it's not real. But then one day you realize that, hey, this really happened, and it was really my mother.
Do you remember your parents well?
Yes. I love them. I love them both. They told us to take out the clothes, and nobody went to the showers because we knew the showers are gas.
It's so horrible, and I can't really imagine.
Matter of fact, I didn't even know that everybody's mother was in a Holocaust.
As we walked into the camp, immediately they took it to the Schrager. When my children cried because they got hurt or because they didn't get what they wanted, I didn't hear or see my children. I saw them with her.
I don't want to feel guilty that I have put
What's a good time for you?
Load on you because of my experience.
He did.
Okay.
He did. He put a load on me.
It's obvious that it has something to do with who I am. I don't know to what extent it does.
I think I owe all my children an apology.
guilt and your imagination, your fantasy about what might have happened and what might have happened to you, totally different Holocaust guy. What you're talking about is the Holocaust of the mind.
I don't want people to see it.
I'm down. Chair just went down 50.
Okay. So I think that trailer sets off where we're going as a jumping point to where we're going to be today. Hold on a minute. We have a lot of all these technical issues going on. So, and I want you to understand that this program is not to relive the concentration camps, but to actually bring hope, to discuss how our parents provided us the ability to hope and to see the future. And with that, I'm going to turn it over now officially to Dana, and Dana will continue.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to this presentation. I'm really excited to have so many of you here to talk about this really important topic and how to bring more hope and healing into our lives. And I'm also noticing that a lot of people have their microphones on, so it would be helpful if everybody who is not speaking at this time, if you could press mute. I think the majority of people on my open screen have their microphones on, and that way we'll have less disruption. Okay, so we're here to talk about a topic called intergenerationally transmitted trauma. And we're going to talk about what it is and how it affects us, people who are in the second, third, and even fourth generations of survivors. And most importantly, we're going to talk about what we can do about it and how we can improve our lives. First, we're going to have the panelists talk for around an hour. And then in the second hour, we're going to share stories. So if those of you in the audience are interested, in about at around 11 o'clock, I guess, you're going to have an opportunity, Jeffrey will moderate this, to share your story if you're aware of the ways in which, in the aftermath of the Holocaust, how it might have shaped your parents' behaviors and grandparents, depending on your generation, and then how you think it affects you. And most especially, we would love to hear if there's any tools that you have used to help you overcome this. So it's not going to be psychotherapy, but it's going to be a sharing of stories. So to jump in, let's get a working definition of what is intergenerationally transmitted trauma. It starts when one person in a family experiences horrific repeated traumas and understandably does not leave this experience unscathed. Afterwards, the survivor does the best they can to cope, but inevitably the trauma leaves some kind of impact on their future relationships, on their relationships with their children, and the inadvertent messages that get transmitted to the children. So for example, a message that might be given, even not in words, but just sort of in little comments and attitudes and behaviors, the survivor might give the message that the world is a dangerous place and that you need to prepare for, imminent disaster. And in turn, that transmits a lot of anxiety and fears to the children. And the next generations absorb these messages, and it can affect your own functioning, and it can cause the next generation to live with fears and anxieties, stress, depression. And sometimes we don't even realize that we're living with high levels of these emotions because it's all we've ever known. So the good news is the hope is there's ways to heal this trauma. And I'm going to give you an example to help illustrate this more. But first, I want to mention that this phenomena has been well studied in Holocaust survivors, but it also applies to people who have experienced other complex trauma. It could be people who have experienced the pogroms in Russia. It could be other genocides. It could be slavery. It's not specific to the Holocaust, but it definitely applies to the Holocaust. All right, so to illustrate this example, I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself and how I've come to this topic. And my family experienced the pogroms in Russia. Those are my direct relatives. But my relatives who did not make it out of Russia to America were left behind in what is now the Ukraine. And many of them were in the Holocaust. So it's very personal to me, as I'm sure it's personal to all of you here. So I'll start by telling my story. A few years ago, I started having intense nightmares. They came out of nowhere. They were really nothing I had ever experienced before, and they were not typical for me. But I would find myself waking up in bed in the middle of the night, jolting awake and screaming at the top of my lungs. I had no idea where this came from. I will add that later, as I investigated this, I found out that one of my great aunts did this as well. Apparently, my cousin told me every day of her life. So this was coming from somewhere, but I began to realize that maybe this was not coming from me. I started to feel in my nightmares, in my dreams, that somebody was hovering over my body, and I would have to turn on the light in my room to be certain that nobody was really there. So this became really disruptive to my sleep and to my waking functioning. So I had to figure out what this was about. And I clicked for me that this trauma did not belong to me, and that I thought perhaps it belonged to my grandmother or my great-grandparents. So I started investigating, and I started with psychotherapy. And I will say that this is a very helpful avenue. I'm a little biased because I'm a psychologist myself, but I still did find it very helpful. I didn't know very much about my family history. I think many of you could relate to this, that the family did not talk about what happened or what traumas that the people in the family endured. So I only had small shreds of information when I started. And I interviewed people in every branch of my family, and it was very interesting because different people in the family had different pieces of information. And I started to get a picture of what went on in this shtetl. And then I did historic research and genealogy research, which is another tool you can use to help unravel what's going on for you. And I learned about the Cossacks and how they came and attacked these villages in general, and the atrocities that they committed. And my friend asked me, why are you doing this? Like, why are you going down this avenue, learning all this distressing information? And I told her I felt like I was in the middle of a journey and that I couldn't turn back now because I would be stuck and my nightmares would continue. And I had to move forward, and I didn't know where this journey was taking me, but I had hope that somewhere at the end of the journey that there would be some kind of relief, or I had to get to the end to see what would happen. So one of the big breaking points for me was discovering firsthand accounts of what happened in my grandparents' village the night that my great-grandparents were murdered. And I found some of these accounts by people I met in Facebook groups. There's a lot of genealogy groups on Facebook, and it felt like no accident that I met these people online, and they were really helpful for my understanding of what happened. And although what I discovered, the details are difficult, I really felt like I understood what happened to my grandparents and my great grandparents, and this was a relief to me. And of course, there's some details I'll never know, but I really know enough because my nightmares subsided. So this is really, the great relief and great hope that, at the end of this process, there can be relief and there could be healing. And I think this journey was possible because I had the therapist. She felt like she was by my side on the journey, and she helped me feel safe, and she helped me deal with the distress of all this. And she helped me bear what my grandparents could never say out loud. So I also think there's great healing to be had with storytelling. So I thank you all for listening to my story. Every time I tell my story, I feel like it has a little bit less of a paralyzing power over me. And I hope that this story can help you, the listener. There's a lot of help to be had in hearing other people's stories, because when you hear what other people have to say, hopefully you hear pieces that apply to you, and that helps you begin to understand your particular story. Okay, so to move on with our panel, the next thing we're going to do to help you unravel your family's particular story is we're going to go to Dr. Deborah Boris, and she is going to talk about how this trauma can get transmitted in families and what it might look like in second and third and even fourth generations, what we as in the surviving generations might be experiencing. So thank you, Dr. Boris, for being here today.
Sure, thanks, Dana. I really enjoyed hearing the part that you just shared. So I'm going to give a few more examples. Dana gave some of ways that the trauma can come out and affect people in the different generations. And I might accidentally say my parent or my dad, but this could be grandparent, cousin, in terms of who's the survivor. So Dana mentions, and I won't go into depth on this one since she mentioned it, treating it as it's so awful, it can't be talked about. And as relatives come, or as children, let's say, come to know what happened to the survivor, they may start wondering and feeling like, wow, they never talk about it. It must be so awful. And that already transmits anxiety and fear of it being treated like that. Then in my family, and it was actually talked about some, as well as my dad would make comments starting when I was very young. For example, let's say dinner was going to be served in an hour and I was hungry. I was in elementary school, like, Mom, when's dinner? And he might make an offhand comment like, you don't know what real hunger is. Just like an ominous comment like that, drop it right in the middle of the family, and then it doesn't say anything else. Or another type of ominous comment of a different sort, when there would be World War II movies, especially once Holocaust movies started being on, and we would watch them as a family, and he would always comment, and I believe what the following is true, but the comment again was ominous. The movie didn't even come close to portraying what it was like. He'd say something like that, and that would be the whole comment. And also, he was obsessed with watching any kind of World War II movies. There used to be World War II movies on Saturday afternoons in Los Angeles when I was growing up. He would be glued, and they'd show them over and over again over the course of a season. He'd watch them over and over again. And most of them actually didn't have the Holocaust in them. This was, I'm 63, so this was during the 1960s. So that was another example. I have a couple more. And these, I'm only mentioning things that I know are common, even though I'm speaking in first person, but these are common sorts of things. I've always been fascinated with disasters, natural disasters, other disasters. Now, unfortunately, terrorism, which has become more of a focus older in life. I read 9/11 books voraciously. Any kind of trauma, especially group trauma, I've always been drawn to, and is directly related. Many people who are either survivors themselves or in one of the generations get really preoccupied with media about traumas. Me too. Like I've watched Contagion and the movies about viruses like 4 times, fascinated. Also with preparation. This is not so much a thing for me, but it's very common. Over preparation for any possible trauma, injury, auto accident, like very concerned about safety. And the parents or whoever the survivor is, but this can be passed down, being very overprotective and having trouble like letting kids separate. Separate means like, you know, they have to go off to school like kindergarten or going off to college. My parents, even though I frankly did very well in school, probably could have gotten a scholarship to schools they couldn't afford. They would hear nothing about me leaving Los Angeles for school. And I think it was directly related to that. My mom was not a survivor of the Holocaust, but she was a survivor of the Great Depression, and her family went through a lot of trauma there, which has some overlap. Also, having significant reactions, fear to even normal temporary separations. I used to get so anxious as a child when I'd be with the babysitter was fine, nice. If my parents were 5 minutes late for when they said they get home, and the babysitter would be reassuring. Now, there were no cell phones then, but I would start thinking they were dead. And I think this also relates directly to that. And I think parents who are in the generations, when they have kids, often have that reaction when their kids are off at school or on a field trip or something like that. I've observed that in other parents. Fortunately, by the time my kids were old enough to be even going off to nursery school, I feel very fortunate that I had realized I needed to do work on that. And I had also done a lot of psychotherapy and also like meditation, yoga for anxiety. So I think, hopefully I'm not fooling myself, that with my kids, I didn't pass that part on, and they're both on the East Coast in college now. So they seem like they were ready to do that. And I enjoy being an empty nester. Anyway, maybe, do I have time for a couple more types, Dana?
Yes, sure, go ahead.
Okay, let's see. Nightmares, like Dana had, about pieces of the events. Let's see. Maybe I've covered a lot of them, actually. I'll mention one other thing that I actually didn't realize was connected to the Holocaust for many years. When I was a little girl, there's this huge park that people in LA know about called Griffith Park, very huge community park. And it had a couple of fires, bad fires, but the park sustained when I was a little girl. And our extended family, the Holocaust survivor side of the family, so the 3 uncles, including my dad, or three brothers who survived, all of our families would get together, and we happened to go to the park, totally coincidentally. I was so fascinated where you could see the burnt out areas, like incredibly, and drawn to them. And then they started appearing in my dreams through the years, once I was grown up, everything. And I've come to feel that that was some representation of either the gas chambers or like a destroyed part of my family history, something like that, because it was such a repeating theme. And I wasn't going to Griffith Park anymore. There's certainly been much worse fires. We get a lot of brush fires in LA that have personally burnt down friends' houses and so on. But it was always that Griffith Park burnt out hillside. So I think that's another kind of dramatic example. And just another thing is general anxiety. It's taken a lot of psychotherapy, work on meditation, yoga, things like that, for me to not be a worrier about everything like that could go wrong with any situation. Oh, and let me mention the last thing I'll mention is another thing about separation, but it's fascinating because I have an example of a 3rd generation where we just discovered we had the same symptom. So I've got a cousin who's in her 30s and she's 3rd generation. And we just discovered that we both have had a lifelong issue when we're single, but starting to like date somebody we really like, of being totally freaked out that they're not going to call us again, or something's going to happen to them. even if we're in the relationship, we're getting a lot of reassurance and connection, and the partner really likes us or loves us, she and I discovered we can have a virtual anxiety attack, dreaming up that we're never going to see the person again. And I think it's related to the Holocaust. I mean, I shouldn't be laughing, but it was just ironic because here I am 63 and she's in her 30s, and we by accident happened to discover this. So I'll leave that set of examples at that point, I think.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Boris, for sharing. That was very illuminating to hear about these family messages. And I think a lot of us can relate to what you said. I was nodding my head a lot, I know. Okay, so the good news is, the hope is there's tools to help with these kind of messages and these kind of family dynamics. So next, we're going to hear from Lindsay, who's going to talk about how she uses writing to help express the things that have happened to her, and how she uses it to help with trauma, and how she encourages other people to use storytelling to help them. So Lindsay, why don't you start? I can't see you on my screen, but I know you're here.
I'm talking. Okay.
Oh, there you are. Hi, Lindsay. Welcome.
Hi. Thank you. Well, thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here. Everything that everyone else is saying is quite familiar, but considering that I'm the granddaughter of Holocaust survivors, it was a little different. Definitely, I can relate to that piece about the silence around the stories. But I think what's interesting more is I could see how it impacted my mother's world, and then how my mother's world impacted me. One thing that really I took away and worked through is how feelings were an inconvenience, meant to be swept under the rug, meant to be kind of spoken over, and they're just an inconvenience. So luckily, I guess I had the gift of wanting to be a writer and a poet. And to be honest, it's really more of a calling. I started writing at a really young age, especially as a teenager, you know, when you're kind of going through that life experience where, you know, everything in the world sucks. So in any case, I think it was through that gift of writing where I was able to find my voice. And so that this silence is changed into some kind of empowerment, really. And so lately, I know that we all want to move away more from the word trauma towards healing. And, you know, that's really made me think more how I can help others. And that's why I did end up creating an online publication through Medium, and it's called Put It to Rest. And it's just that kind of idea that, you know, we all have these stories that, you know, we should maybe put to rest, share, and through giving voice, we can kind of, you know, maybe find more peace. But really, a lot of my early writing was really concerned with identity, identity as it relates to my Jewish identity, my identity as a woman. And so really what ended up happening was I took a lot of my early writing and brought together some of the poetry to make the debut chapbook. Again, it's called Casa de mi Corazón, a travel journal of poetry and memoir. And really, it's about me in my earlier days, in my kind of mid-20s, when I wanted to get in touch with my roots. So from 97 to 2005, I traveled to Israel and to parts of Europe. And when I did visit the Holocaust memorial sites, it was very emotional, very overwhelming, such desperation and sadness. But I do remember being at Dachau, at the concentration camp, looking down at those pebbles and thinking to myself, wow, like I can't let the silence take over, you know, and I have stories to tell. And so some of the poems in the book, one, for instance, called The Streets of Munich, the speaker does find some kind of sense of empowerment and forgiveness in the story. But more than that, I would say the last poem in the book called Tikkun Olam kind of more gives voice to how important it is to, you know, speak your truth. And when you speak your truth, I really feel you're speaking truth for, your family and everyone else who maybe couldn't speak their truth. So even though I did have the kind of gift of voice and a power to speak my truth, when I was a young mother and overwhelmed with issues of fertility and learning how to navigate being a working mom and a mom, I did lose my voice. I really didn't write for probably about 5 to 8 years. I wrote a poem here and there. But then I kind of woke myself up. And so the poem at the end of the series, Tikkun Olam, really talks about how it's important to give voice and also to really not forget your voice and to make that oath to yourself. And that really in life, social justice and healing can happen, with the idea of Tikkun Olam and repairing the world, and right in the darkness, we find light. So I am finished speaking about my story, but I thought maybe I could just finish with the one poem that comes at the end of the book, to just give you some more kind of context about the things I just spoke of.
Is this entitled Tikkun Olam?
Yes. So here we go. Sometimes you lock your heart inside a dark passage you forgot you had, and then you stumble upon it, a dusty old book. At once you're hooked to a long forgotten oath. Is this what it means to be woke from a dream, a whimsical dream, like a shell of laborious protection I was sleeping between? I see myself in the reflection, merging fragmented glass to find some spirit that goes by the name of Tikkun Olam, in the shambles that tell a story from my layer of protection, nurturing the new baby born out of necessity, my baby, my life, my rebirth, reincarnation. It sounds like a mantra of bell cantos. Feed me before I feed you. Feed me like I feed you. Feed me too. Thank you.
Very nice.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Lindsay, for sharing that. I really like this idea of giving voice to what others were silent about. It does feel very empowering. Okay, so now I'm going to talk a little bit more about other tools that we can use to help with healing. And I have a like a slide or a handout that lists the tools that we're talking about today. And Jeffrey has that. So if you would like this list of tools, like it's like a summary, you can email Jeffrey. Jeffrey is going to put his email in the chat, and he will send it to you. I think another tool that a lot of people use is the tool of books and movies. It's really like a storytelling tool. It's somebody else's journey. And I think a lot of healing can happen from that. When you see yourself in the shoes of other people, when you discover a piece of yourself in their story, you begin to understand your own journey better. And you also begin to realize that you're not alone and that you're seen. So it can be really powerful to use books and movies as a piece of your journey towards healing. And, as Jeffrey writes frequently, he has seen 500 Holocaust movies, I think primarily during the pandemic. And so, I know he was driven to do that as a tool for understanding and a tool to work towards healing. So another tool that we've mentioned, but we're going to talk about more in depth now, is psychotherapy and also support groups. So Dr. Boris is going to take it from here and tell us more about how psychotherapy can be a helpful tool towards healing.
One of the major ways it can is the therapist, ideally someone trained in treating trauma reactions, can help you identify patterns. It could be reaction patterns, behavior patterns, patterns of emotions, like I gave the example for me of like excessive worrying and so on. patterns that are related to the Holocaust and being of the generations that someone may not have realized. And like Dana, I think so aptly traced the specific content of the nightmares to specific things about relatives' experiences. Therapists can help do that. And when you learn to identify patterns and their sources, it does typically either eliminate the pattern or reduce them because you understand them, you have more of a sense of control. So that's one of the major ways that psychotherapy helps. And obviously you have the support and the safe environment that gets built for dealing with these vulnerable things. I'll also mention, but not go into the technical detail of how there are now several widely, accepted and kind of researched types of psychotherapy specifically for things like flashbacks, nightmares, trauma-related anxiety, called somatic psychotherapy, sensory motor psychotherapy, and EMDR is another one. Again, they're kind of technical to go in this context, but I just wanted to label them. And then Dana mentioned support groups. So Second Generation is a support group, and there are other support groups, and it doesn't have to be Second Generation, of course, and there are other support groups specific to dealing with Holocaust-related trauma and experiences. And support groups are where people who have a common concern or experience come together, usually with a leader that's either a trained therapist or a trained semi-professional person, often who's had the same experience, and they all create a safe environment for talking about different ways that the experience has affected them, different techniques or tools. Sometimes people get involved in, community action or political action that is empowering related to genocide and so forth. So support groups are very powerful because of the shared common concern and the fact that people in the group are at different stages in terms of dealing with things. So you learn from other people who are further along in their own process of healing. And also the fact that you're in the double role of helping others when you have ideas, or you being, as a member of a group, someone who gives support, that's also a healing part. So those are very powerful types of interventions, and typically less expensive, and it may not be every week. So some people who have trouble affording psychotherapy or have extremely busy lives find a support group useful. Was there any other intervention you wanted me to cover, Dana, or does that cover it? You're on mute.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Boris. That was super helpful. Thank you for shedding some light on that. Okay, so what I want to let everybody know, in case anybody is interested in psychotherapy, is I have made a list of resources that I gave to Jeffrey. So if you would like my one-page sheet of resources for finding a support group or finding psychotherapy, you can again email Jeffrey and he will send that out to you. And it's a list for information. I'm not endorsing any specific agencies or people. I really do wish I knew the work intimately of people in every corner of the globe, so I could give a personal recommendation for all of you. But I know that the list I have will head you in the right direction towards finding what you're looking for. So I just want to highlight what Dr. Boris said. When we can figure out like what our patterns are, or what is sort of weighing us down, and when we can connect that to the experiences of our relatives, the traumas that our relatives endured, once we make that connection, we're a huge piece, a huge step along the road of healing. And so I have hope, because as we've talked about today, there are many different tools you can use. There are many different paths to work towards healing. And I also have hope because, as our history shows us, we are people who are very resilient and very resourceful. Okay, someone needs to put themselves on mute, please. Okay, thank you. So now we are getting towards our midpoint of this Zoom. And I'd like to turn it over to Jeffrey, who is going to facilitate audience participation. And if you have a story that you would like to share, a brief story, we want as many people who would like to participate to have an opportunity. So I know Jeffrey is going to encourage people to keep their stories brief and focused on the aftermath and the patterns you've seen in your family and the healing that you've been able to take. And if you have specific tools you've used, we would love to know. My list of tools is a working list, and I'm going to add to it as people share their specific examples. So hello, Jeffrey, it's your turn.
Terrific. Well, thank you, Lindsay. Thank you, Deborah. Thank you, Dana. This was terrific, and I think people in the audience are already have chatted with me on how relevant and how important this program is for them. And I'll just add my comment at the end. My parents never spoke to my sister or I about any of their Shoah experiences. And my quick story is that when I was in bar mitzvah age, I had to go with my mom for lessons. My mom removed her tattoo from the concentration camp on her left arm, and I didn't ever remember it being there. But I found out in my experiences of research that she did it when she came to the United States in 1954. When I was at my bar mitzvah, I was sitting to the left of my mom, and I touched her scar, and she immediately recoiled and gave me the dagger eyes that only mom can give their son. And I'm sure every one of you can understand what that would be like. And from that point on, I never, ever approached the subject, read a book, could watch a movie, and was completely traumatized. And like Dana, I too have had my bouts of trauma and nightmares as I have gone through my business career. And I have been a technology startup entrepreneur my whole career. And it certainly has affected me. But what I've learned is there are people in this audience who have become my family. And when I moved to San Diego in 2019, I was introduced by Freddie Pacquier, who's on the program, to a group in San Diego called the Second Generation Shoah Group. And when I met that group, because I wasn't willing to go to that group, I wasn't willing to stay to the group because they were showing a movie of the Holocaust, and my wife Myra was practically had to pin me in the corner to keep me there. But that support group is not a therapy group, it's a social group. And I realized for the first time in my life that I was not alone, that there were many people in the group, and there's 120 members of the group, all second generation survivors, know by talking that it helps to be able to express oneself about your generational trauma. So that's my little story. I'm going to now allow people to raise their hand using the tools we have that I've expressed at the beginning. And I will go through, and I need some help, Dana and Deborah, if I miss anybody. So I'm just going to go from the first screen that I see, and Arnold is raising his hand over there. So Arnold, and then you have to make sure that you unmute yourself. So I'd like everyone to stay muted because there may be background noise, dogs barking, and so on. But again, Arnold, take the floor, please, in a short story. And what we're talking about now is not about the camps or the horrors. We're talking about healing. And I'm going to insist that we stay on point, and I'm going to insist that we have short. So I don't want to be disrespectful if I need to cut you off, but I do want everyone to have a chance to speak, and we only have an hour. So go ahead, Arnold.
Okay, just one quick point of personal privilege, I suppose. I have the good fortune of living in the same community with Jeffrey, and I just want to acknowledge how grateful I know we all are for the platform you've created wherein we can delve into these issues. So, and I'm also grateful that you have recovered so nicely from the medical challenges you have been experiencing.
Thank you, Arnold.
What I wanted to underline, Jeffrey, is that you opened and you just again expressed the notion of hope. And through the years that I served as director of JFS in New Orleans and in LA, I had an opportunity to meet many survivors and many children of survivors. And when I would ask them what it is, let's say, that they might cite as why they survived and their person in the bunk below them or above them didn't, hope was the answer. And I think that is something that needs to be underlined, that is what carried them through in their darkest moments. There's a book that I've read and a person I've met who wrote the book, Gerda Weissman-Klein, who throughout her book cites how she was able to survive by being hopeful that there was, a rainbow at the end of this horrendous experience that she had. So I just wanted to underline that. I have many stories, but I'll be true.
Yeah, thank you, Arnold.
challenge.
Bonnie, you have your hand up.
Okay, yeah. I just want to mention just very briefly background that my father was a survivor. My mother was American born, and he lost a wife and 2 children in the early 40s. He was an older father by the time he had my sister and I. And I used to think that he was very different than a lot of other Holocaust survivors, that he seemed more angry, more difficult to relate to. He didn't really bond with us, I felt. He was hypercritical of my mother, of us. When we were very young, he basically ignored us and then became just very critical, never praised us or anything. But I've come to realize through talking to other friends that especially, I think, people who lost children before having a new family, they tended to be like that. Maybe not all, but I think it was harder for them. My friend had a father who lost 6 children to the Holocaust, and from what she says, he sounds a lot like my father, hypercritical, hard to relate to. The level that my sister and I related to him mostly was through religion. We were Orthodox, and I am Orthodox, my sister is too. And we went to shul with him every week. The holidays, everything, we sat with him until we were 12 in shul. And it's during those times that he was more relatable, I guess you could say. And I've come to realize that he wasn't really so different, like we thought, oh, we have the hardest, but we didn't really. And I realized that through reading, through Facebook groups, through being around other children of survivors, that, it was hard, but he wasn't the only one. And we also come to realize that he, in the summers, we would go to the Catskills. I'm from New York originally, but we would go to spend our summers in bungalow colonies in the Catskills. And there he was with his landsmen, the people that he knew during the war. And it was those summers, that he seemed to be his happiest, his most at peace, He was friendlier, he was happier. And other people have said the same thing, that possibly because that may have reminded them of the DP camp. He was in Fehrenwald, which was a very, very large DP camp. And I've seen pictures of it, and I realized it kind of does look like a bungalow colony. And what they did was sort of like like a summer camp for people in a way. And I realized that being in the Catskills was probably not all that dissimilar from that. And I'm perhaps wondering that maybe that's why he was at his happiest. And so it's very interesting to see that connection. Unlike a lot of people, my father was very open about what happened to him from the time we were very young. First of all, he was an amputee. So from the time we were very young, we obviously knew he didn't have a leg, so we probably asked questions. And he always told us what happened, especially every Passover. It was like war storytelling time. But it was in bits and pieces. And not until my uncle wrote a book after my father had passed away, that we see the chronology of everything and what really happened, connected all the dots of all the different pieces. So that's was very illuminating, shall we say?
Okay, thank you, Bonnie. Bonnie,
okay,
thank you. Eva. Unmute. There you go.
Just trying to unmute myself here. Thank you for the opportunity, and thank you everyone for really everything that you've shared with us. It's so really helpful to hear all of this. So my parents were Holocaust survivors. My father, we were from Hungary, from Budapest. My father was in slave labor, well, forced labor camps, spent 2 years in Russia, and then forced labor in Yugoslavia and in different places where alongside the Hungarian units. My mother and my grandmother took in a Hungarian family, the rabbi's family from the neighborhood where we were, that lived in Slovakia. And the deportations took place in Slovakia earlier than in Budapest, and they escaped from Slovakia to Budapest. And my mother, my grandmother were hiding this family in their home. And they were the ones who said to my mother, what are you waiting for? I mean, they had some connections with the Israeli underground, I would call it, and they ended up taking the family somehow to Israel right before the deportations took place in Budapest. But they were constantly on my mother and saying, "What are you waiting for? What are you waiting for? This is, it's going to happen here, and it's going to be too late. You need to make arrangements beforehand." So my mother survived. I mean, it's a long story, but whatever. My mother ended up she got false papers through my father, and they were able to, she was able to survive under false papers. She took an apartment in another part of Budapest, and they survived there. But the big piece, I guess, is how did this impact me? So I was born in Budapest. We came here when I was a young child. We lived in Israel before that. And the one thing, my parents spoke about their experiences from the time we were very young. They were very open about it. My brother and I asked a lot of questions, and they answered all of them. And the more we asked, the more they shared. It was really rough growing up. They were extremely overprotective. I felt like I lived in a foreign country because my world was Hungarian Jewish world, and I happened to be living in New York in this Hungarian Jewish world. So it was a very kind of lived in a dichotomy growing up. And but the major lesson that came out of my family was you need to keep your eyes open, and you have to rise to every challenge that comes before you. You have to be smart, you have to be thoughtful, you just can't act impulsively, but you need to rise to the challenge. You can't be afraid of anything. You just need to kind of rise to the challenge. And that means you have to be an overachiever. You've got to have A's in everything in school. There's no such thing as not coming home with an A, because that was unacceptable. You just had to do well, and you had to be involved. So it wasn't easy growing up. And a big turning point in my life was when I was turning 16. Everybody was having sweet 16s, and my parents said, what's that? That's a goyish thing, it's a sweet 16. But I said, no, I want something special. And they said, okay, what do you want? I said, I want to go back to Budapest, and I want to see where I was born. I want to see what our life was. I want to see this place. I live in Budapest in New York. I want to see Budapest. I want to understand, I want to see you in your own environment. I want to see what that means. So my parents agreed. I couldn't believe it, but they agreed. And we went back to Budapest. This was in 1972. We left Hungary in 1957 and lived in Israel for a while, and then came to America. So this was in 1972, the height of communism. My father said to me very clearly before we landed on the plane, under no circumstance do you speak in a hotel room about anything. If we speak about anything, we speak in the streets, we speak, carefully to each other, not in front of other. I mean, talk about I think at the age of 5, I knew if something happened, which shoes I had to take with me that I could walk with for a long time. I mean, the craziness inside your head about all of this is really intense. So anyway, we land in Hungary, and I am overly excited. And the first thing, and my father would always tell us these stories about, how he did well and how he managed, and he because he was, rising to the challenges and not afraid and doing these things. So I always felt my parents were heroes. And it always felt a little bit too much. Like, were you really that person? Could you really do that? Because I would never be able to manage. How could I ever do what you guys did? It was incredible. And anyway, so we get to Hungary. And the first morning we wake up and my father says, where do you want to go for breakfast? And I said, the Zserbo. And I don't know how many of you are from Hungary or know about that. It's a very famous coffee house in Budapest, kind of Art Deco, very beautiful. I said, we have to have breakfast at the Zserbo because that's where I want to go. My father said, okay. So we're sitting in the Zserbo, and this is like out of a movie. Okay, we're sitting in the Zserbo, and my mother, my father, and I eating brioche and having cappuccinos and very excited and feel very grown up. I'm 16 years old, and a man comes over to my father and he says to him, Klein Sándor, Devad, in Hungarian. He's asking him, is this you? And my father says, yes, it's me. And he says, do you remember me? And my father says, I apologize. I'm sorry. I don't remember you. And he looks at my father and he says, he gives us his name. And he says, you know what? I get it. You didn't remember me, but there was 200 of us in the slave labor unit, and you were our leader. And there was one of you. And it was because of you that we all managed to get back at the end. He said, so he goes, thank you for everything. He goes, I don't know if I ever thought I would ever see you again after the war. And he said, we left after the war and I went to Stockholm and I live in Sweden. And I was like, I was sitting there like mortified, like I couldn't believe this. This was the, confirmation of all the stories that my father had told us and all the things that happened. And it was mind-boggling. It was absolutely mind-boggling. So that was one thing that happened on that trip. There were a number of things that happened, and then over the years.
Ava, I don't
letting
want
it go.
Yeah, thank you. That is a fabulous story. We should bring that story again another time. So Miriam, I see you have your hand raised, so please share us this. And let's keep our stories as brief as we can. I know there's such passion in these stories, and I hate to be the one to cut you off, but we have so many people who do want to share a story.
Thank you for all your great stories. They are fascinating and interesting. My story is a little different. I too am a daughter of 2 Auschwitz survivors. My mother was also in Theresienstadt. My father was in Lodz Ghetto. My father was already a renowned artist during the interwar years. He had a family. He lost his first family, his wife and little daughter. So I am from the second marriage. My parents met in Prague after the war, where my father held his first Holocaust art exhibition. It wasn't called Holocaust at that time. They were just concentration pictures from, and also from the Lodz Ghetto, drawings and paintings. And this was already in January 1946. And then the communists came in and they fled in 1949. They got married in 48 and fled in 49 to Israel, where I was born. So I grew up in the world of art. Art shaped my life. My father painted landscapes, portraits, and it wasn't very unusual for me to be surrounded by children of other survivors and others, especially in Israel. And then when we came to the United States, my father started a new career as a commercial artist, but he never forgot the paintings and the drawings from his memories. He had to pull them out. And in 1963, he began a second series. He called it Because They Were Jews. These were memories that he had to tear out from his heart. And he put all of this on paper. And of course, I was about 12 and I was able to see him in his studio very intensely, drawing. He would look at himself, he would put himself in his artwork. Somehow I came out of all of this unscathed. I love my parents very much. It was just the three of us. We were a unit. We did everything together. I also never had a babysitter because we just always were out together and we went everywhere together. I had a happy childhood. I was allowed to do everything. I had even non-Jewish friends. I don't recall anything unusual about that. And when my father died, I took on the responsibility of showing his artwork to the world as he intended. This is something he never asked me to do. He rather say, go outside, breathe the fresh air, health is most important. But the artwork sits with me. My parents' stories sit with me. So for the last 40 years, I've been doing exactly that. I've been having exhibitions, I've been writing, I've been lecturing, and the artwork has traveled around the world. Some of his work is that he produced in 1945, ended up at Yad Vashem. 3 of them are on display in the Holocaust History Museum. He has artwork also in the collections of the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, but I still hold the largest portion of his works. And I'm looking for my next exhibition. Oh, because of COVID, everything kind of stopped, and it's kind of been hard to get started again. But I continue with doing what he really wanted to do.
How is this affecting, how does it help you to heal?
I feel very good about what I do. I feel that what I am doing gives me purpose, actually. It's a tremendous feeling of, my father wanted to speak for the victims, and I feel that I'm carrying on his mission. And I don't really think, I didn't know about this trauma intergenerational thing till a few years ago when it all started to splash over the newspapers and in books. And I was surprised actually because that there was actually a name to it. But surely, as children of survivors, we do inherit certain things. We are different. We were brought up a little different. But overall, I think I came out all right.
Okay, Miriam, I'm going to stop you there. Rosa, you have your hand raised. Please unmute yourself.
Yes, hello everybody. I'm Rosa, and I'm also a clinical psychologist. PhD in clinical psychology, although I have been I haven't been doing clinical work for the last, I would say 15 years. I've been working more in the applied psychology side and executive coaching and leadership development space. Nevertheless, my training was in clinical psychology, so that's part of who I am. I'm a daughter of 2 Holocaust survivors who lost all their families. I'm the youngest of 3, and I was born and raised in Venezuela. The part that I want to speak to, because I want to be brief, is about, as I was listening to all of you, I was thinking about, okay, so how did I cope with it? Well, how did my family cope with it? And I think that there's 2 main themes that I think I would say. The first thing is about tikkun olam, paying it forward. I think that my parents in that little Venezuelan town of Maracaibo, my father was the president of the Jewish like the JCC. My mom was active in social circles. There was always doing good for the world. There was that thing about doing good for the world. I myself, by choosing, okay, so in my family, there's my brother's a psychiatrist, I'm a psychologist, my husband is a psychologist, my brother's wife is a clinical social worker. That tells a little bit about how the family chose to deal with hope. I think that for myself, I used to have nightmares when I was a kid about wanting to scream and voice wouldn't come out. And I recall many stories of my mom where she was afraid to speak because she was afraid that they were in Poland, and they would know that she was Jewish. So she would choose not to speak. So I think this thing about giving, helping people find volume to their voice is something that I took upon as a sign of hope. If I can do that for myself and for others, then I am healing from the trauma that they went through. Interestingly enough, the part that I have been connected to the Holocaust. My parents spoke about the Holocaust in different ways. I would say my dad spoke about the stories of survival, how he was able to, in my eyes, he was a hero. I know one of you said that, because he would speak about the decisions he made that allowed him to survive. And then that really helped my mom. My mom and my dad were second cousins. Helped my mom survive. My mom survived because she had a little bit of luck, like she used to say, a bisschen of luck, and a lot of finding people that she could depend on. That was something that the dependency was something that I had an allergic reaction growing up, and I was not going to do that. Now I totally understand how that worked for my mom. But growing up, it was like, I'm going to be an independent woman. I'm not going to depend on anybody. I'm married for 45 years, so I didn't live up to that. And so I'm very traditional in that way. The other thing I want to say, just share, and then I'll stop because I want to have other opportunities, is as a family, we took a trip to Poland, which ended up being extremely impactful and extremely traumatic, because at the end of the trip, my mom passed away. And that's part of what I'm still working through. What was it about that trip that made her heart go? And for many years, I sort of did not bring it up to my consciousness. I want to say that my oldest sister, wrote a book about our family's history in Spanish. And then about 2 or 3 months ago, I would say 3 months ago, it was in the summer, she decided to translate it into English. She lives in Miami. So she would call me and we would I read the whole manuscript in English, and now we're thinking about who can help her publish it. And for me, it was like, this is an unfinished business for me. I need to still dig and understand how it was for my mother. What happened that this is how it ended for her and how it ended for us. So that is where I am re-engaged in this topic for myself and trying to find the healing part of it, in terms of trying to understand this aspect and helping my sister read the manuscript and gave her my feedback was really healing. So what I want to leave you with is that paying it forward is one way that has helped me, has helped my family heal, has helped us have hope. That's it. You didn't have to stop, Jeffrey.
Okay, thank you. And I am looking if anybody else has any hand raises. I haven't seen any come up technically. So I am going to ask a few of you who I know through a virtual connection, and I call you my colleagues and friends. So Sally, maybe you can take a second to unmute yourself. And you indicated that you wanted to share a story and chat with me. So I'm giving you the opportunity, and perhaps you can explain. You also can mention your book. Ava, if you don't mind, I'd like to do the same thing with you. Joanne, I know you're very committed to this discussion. And Fred, I want to eventually get to you. And anybody else, also Mark, you came to me in Zoom. I'd like to give you an opportunity. So I'm going to sort of now call you out. If you don't want to speak, please don't. Arnold, you have your hand raised again. I don't know if that's another thing you want to say or you just forgot to put it down. Okay, so go ahead, Saul.
I just want to say ditto to what Arnold said about Jeffrey. I give him all the accolades and commend him for his efforts in bringing us all together. We're all brothers and sisters because we all share a deep trauma that we faced and our parents faced. I'm going to just be brief. I really have a wonderful story that I was able to publish, and I've been pretty successful in having my book sold, and people being so wonderful in their responses to reading the book. When I was a kid, 7 years old, I lived in the back of a candy store in Brooklyn, in the heart of the mafia. And my parents had no idea where they were and what was going on. And the difference between the mafia and the police was, I'm assuming, very confusing for them. But the most traumatic thing that occurred when I was a kid, and to my father, who after, without the trauma of concentration camp, both people were in Auschwitz. They managed to form a loving relationship in Auschwitz. They both went different ways when they went on the death march. My mother wound up in Bergen-Belsen, and my father wound up in Buchenwald. Anyway, but they somehow got together at the end of the war, got married. I was born in Germany. Back to Brooklyn, the candy store. My father gets a phone call in the middle of the night in the candy store, and we didn't have our own private phone. There was a phone booth in the candy store. He goes into the candy store, listens to the person speaking to him, and all of a sudden I hear my mother screaming and my father screaming. I was in bed. I slept on a mattress that was on soda crates, and I come out and I can't understand what's going on. My father's banging his head against the wall. His brother, who is also a survivor, got struck by lightning and died. And he was in New Jersey. He had a chicken farm, which was a common thing for a lot of survivors at that time. They went off to places where they could kind of like undo the trauma that they had experienced. So anyway, so my father had a nervous breakdown. It was a difficult time. I wish Dana and all its psychotherapists that are with us now would have been there then. I could have used you very, very, very well. In any event, we managed to survive, and my parents, were able to continue. The fact that you can get. My mother would say, if you can get through concentration camp, you can get through anything. Anyway, they had such great stories, and I also experienced some really interesting things in my development, and I decided to write a book, which I mentioned earlier. The title of the book is
give us the title.
From Bergen-Belsen to Brooklyn, and it's on Amazon. I haven't really marketed anywhere else, despite people, giving me all kinds of advice. But I'm content with it because it's a healing factor. It really is a healing factor, just like the young lady who talked about her grandparents. It is something that will also be for my grandchildren and hopefully their children. And, we need to make sure that the world doesn't allow anything like the Holocaust to ever happen again. And that's why we're very active, I think, in all the turmoils that take place all over the world. And we have to respect life. It's unfortunate that we are the victims of what occurred, and we need to make sure that it doesn't happen again. As the saying goes, never again. Okay, I'm done.
Thanks, Paul. So Kathleen, I see that you're raising your hand. I have a question also for you. From looking at all the tiles on Zoom, you seem to be one of the younger people in our group here. So
Yes,
perhaps you can give us some motivation why you chose to join us today. and how your family history, and it sounds like you are a third or fourth generation survivor.
Actually, no, I'm not. Well, Jeffrey, I met you on Facebook around 2016. You know, when Elie Wiesel passed away. That's when that kind of like just grew out of that. And as I started to embark on this journey, I started to realize that there's no way I could be alone. That I knew there are others that were like me that believed that the Holocaust had actually happened. So that's when I set out on this journey, and I've met thousands of people who.
What journey are you speaking about?
Journey in the
Specific.
Holocaust remembrance and
Okay.
activism, and that's when I started meeting different people, and I met like thousands of others, like I said before, like you, Jeffrey, and thousands of that. And even though I'm not in a 2G or 3G family, it kind of feels like a family. It's like, even though being so young, like I said, that I'm not involved in the Holocaust in a personal way, it's more of a remembrance type of way.
Very nice. Is that what you wanted to bring to us?
Yes.
Okay, terrific. And Bilma, I see that you're coming so far from Brazil, so I want to have you raise your hand and tell us, and maybe you can go on video. I hope you're there, and unmute yourself. Unmute yourself, Bilma, please. You have to unmute yourself. Unmute yourself. There you go.
I come from another part of the world, right? Brazil. I don't think anybody's there.
But I have to ask you, what is behind you?
And this is a picture of the Subotica synagogue in Serbia. I just love traveling, visiting synagogues. And this is one of the most beautiful ones that I ever seen. There
Nice.
are many more. So
Okay.
I always put one behind me, right? I am a daughter of 2 Holocaust survivors from Poland. My mother had trauma. My father didn't have this trauma or trauma. My mother had to be several institutions several times. And the children were quite young and we didn't understand why. So it came later. My mother wouldn't speak, she would write. She was a writer since she was very young age. She would write in Yiddish. So we couldn't understand that writing either, right? But my father would speak. Somebody's asking me if I live in São Paulo. No, I live in Curitiba, which is South São Paulo. Curitiba has the only Holocaust museum in Brazil. My parents survived the war in the Russian part. My father was in a gulag, and my mother was in a kolkhoz, in several kolkhozes around the country, right? They knew each other since they were 5 years old because they were from the same town, the same state, and the same Jewish group, but the war split them apart. They met after the war, they re-met because my father went back to the town and tried to find out the survivors in the family, but he couldn't find. But her brothers came, and then suddenly he knew she was alive and followed them and decided to marry her. But he didn't marry her in Poland. He married her in Germany in a DP camp where they were. My mother wouldn't speak, she would write. My father would speak. I only knew more about my mother's family fate when she passed away, and I found her writings. She wrote her book in Yiddish and translated it in Portuguese. It was a biography, but it was with stories. And we published her book, and we published 3 books from her. She used to write poetry too. And she used to write to several Yiddish newspapers and magazines around the world.
Vilma, maybe I can ask you a question. So how did you heal from your parents?
I don't think I have a trauma. My only trauma is that I couldn't ever meet my grandparents. Everybody had grandparents, and I didn't have grandparents.
Now, why do you take it upon yourself to post every day in the Holocaust groups, children and stories about the Holocaust? What is the impetus? And what is the stimuli that makes you do that?
I think I keep alive my father's mission and my mother's mission, right? My father would speak and give several speeches and conferences, and I was always together with him. He had such a brightful mind, and people would contact me to ask him if he knew such a person, if he knew such a person, and he knew almost everybody they asked him from Poland, right? And my mother wouldn't go back to Poland. I went to Poland with my father over 20 times. It was his dream to go back to his shtetl. The shtetl kept alive in his mind and heart. And I learned a lot. I started to put together all the pieces of a huge puzzle. And I wrote his biography. I am in a master's now in Holocaust study, which is due in November. So I promised my father that his story and the family story and the other people's stories, I'll keep them on.
Very good.
I know a lot of Holocaust survivors, and I love them as parents, and they love me like their child. I have much contact with them.
Very nice. Okay, Mark, you're up next. You have your hand raised. Please unmute yourself and give us your sense.
Thanks, Jeffrey. First of all, I will try to express what a privilege this is to take part in such a gathering of my own people. Here's my story. I grew up in Fort Wayne, Indiana. It's in the upper right-hand corner of Indiana. My parents were sent there for reasons I can go into some other time. And there were no other children of Holocaust survivors in Fort Wayne, Indiana, not surprisingly. So I thought that it was perfectly normal for people to discuss the news around the dinner table in a threatening way, that the world was a frightening place. I thought it was perfectly normal for parents to expect their children to get straight A's in school. I thought it was perfectly normal for parents to assume that their children are going to excel at sports. I'm no athlete, and I've got the knees to prove it. And all the other things that I learned in 1981, I think it was, when I was the Jewish affairs reporter for the English language service of Israel Radio, and Holocaust survivors had their first ever reunion in Jerusalem. There were 5,000 Holocaust survivors who gathered in Jerusalem at Yad Vashem and other places, and 800 of them brought their kids along. And so here I am as a reporter meeting people who finish my sentences and other people who identify with everything I'm talking about here and everything that you've mentioned here tonight. It was an unbelievable, unbelievable situation for me to realize that I was not alone in the world. Now, since then, and I spent a lot of time with the people. Oh, one little funny story, if you'll allow me. I was a radio reporter, right? So I decided I would interview a mother and her son about their relationship and what the Holocaust, how it affected them. The interview was an hour long. I had 22 minutes in the program. I had to listen to the tape 4 times from beginning to end in order to be able to edit it without taking sides. What I learned from all this, I think it fits in a bit with your idea of tikkun olam. and also the psychologist who said that all of her siblings are psychologists, I found that by and large, we as a second generation take on service professions, that we want to help improve the world. It was my goal, and I'll finish with this, that there not be a third generation, that I not pass on the traumas. I mean, I have recurring nightmares, and they're all about losing control. And I vowed to myself I would not pass that on to my kids, and certainly not to their kids. Largely succeeded in that, but both my kids are in service professions, and my son is an expert on the Holocaust and guides people through Yad Vashem. I tried once to take the tour, and I got to the first room. The first room on the tour is a study of a German house where a man would have been doing his work, and I was with my brother at the time. I looked at him and he looked at me, and I said, we could be in our grandfather's study here right now. And no, thank you. We spent the rest of the time in the cafeteria waiting for my son to finish his tour with the other people. So yeah, there are traumas, and I think we control them pretty well, considering here we are all together sharing our experiences and making the world a better place. And I think we can all stand up and give ourselves a cheer about that, Jeffrey.
Thank you, Mark. That was very kind of you to. Arnold, do you have your hand raised there? I don't know if you want to say something again, and then Kaush, I'll come to you next.
I did. I want to pick up on what Mark said, and it seems to me that for future programming, it might be interesting to give focus on what it is that the Holocaust has done to influence us as individuals as we grew into adulthood. For example, I know that my participation, I was very active in athletics, and I wanted to be liked, generally speaking, but on the basketball court, I wanted to demonstrate that a Jew didn't willy-nilly walk into those ovens, because many of my friends, non-Jews, said, why didn't you stand up and fight? So I know my aggressive behavior on a basketball court was influenced by the Holocaust. So to kind of tease out who we are today, because in fact, we have heard these stories or know of these individuals who did go through the Holocaust, I'd like to play a little more on Kathleen's presence and say that I think for me, what is so important in the retelling of these stories is that how can we involve our children, our children's children, future generations in having the passion that those of us who are participating today have. I find my children, in fact, look at this intellectually, but I'm not sure they in any way have the passion that I feel about what the Holocaust should mean to everyone in the future. So it's just some thoughts along those lines. And then one final, Miriam wondering if some of her art could be shared with us. And as she shares that with us, what she can do to explain what her father had in his head and in his heart as he drew these, did these paintings.
Well, Miriam, I would love to have you, and I think we have had some discussion about bringing you to our group and having you make a presentation about your father's art. But also, I wanted to just say and piggyback on Arnold. Arnold and I have established a very close relationship in the 2 years that I have been here. And the reason I actually opened and founded this group was to use the technology that we're using today to bring the world together, as Mark indicated, as Arnold indicated, as Kathleen is here as someone who wants to carry on the torch of remembrance. It is so important. And every time I put these programs together, you know, I'm being very candid. There's a lot of people in our group that are third and fourth generation who are watching and commenting on posts. They may not be able to make it into this program because they're working. And a lot of people wrote to me and said, am I going to record this? And I'm recording this event. And so all of you who are interested in receiving a recording, have my email address in there. Please send me a note. I'll be happy to, when I edit this recording, to share it in a broad way, because this program needs to go much bigger than the less than 100 people that are here today. That I think that we'll be able to bring this program to thousands of people. And right now, at least there's 2,200 people in the group that we have grown to. So Kaush, it's a pleasure to meet you. I've been watching and commenting on your posts virtually. So now I get to see you, and I wish I could hug you, but I can't. So I'll give you a high five. So here you go.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here, Jeffrey, and everyone. Thank you. And it's an honor as well. So it's a different situation for me. My family never suffered the Holocaust. And I'm originally from the southern part of India, and I'm very proud and happy to say that the Jews living there never suffered anti-Semitism. They were received with open arms. They lived for over 2,000 years, and they came in different ways. You can read about all those in the articles I have seen. There's some beautiful synagogues over there that I've shared posts about. They still are there, actually, and they're still being maintained with a lot of. It's a great honor, but it's a national pride. But now I'm Canadian. And so I've been in Atlantic Canada, and I really love the fact that you speak about healing. So I've been through childhood trauma. It's very different than what most of you have been through or your families. It's in fact very minuscule compared to what you or your families must have suffered, but it was quite an intense trauma. I do not want to get into the details of that, but what the impact of that was, I suffered many years from insomnia. I had difficulty going to sleep, and I had difficulty getting good quality sleep, and it had a very profound impact on my health. So how did I heal from it? Maybe that's and how does learning about Holocaust help me? Well, it helps me build. It's educational. It also has cultivated me to become empathetic and be a better human being. And it's been an honor to learn about all your accounts. For me in particular, how I healed, I will just be brief. I started making a few changes in my life. I started going to the gym. It's an integral part of my life. That is like almost like my temple now, the gym. I go there maybe once at least, sometimes twice a day. I work out hard. I love swimming. And the other thing that's helped me heal and overcome insomnia and my addiction to melatonin. I had been addicted to melatonin pills for many, many years, and I have been free from them for the last 5 years. I don't need it to go to sleep. I do what's known as walking meditation. I'm not religious. I don't believe in religion anymore. Like many Canadians, we just sort of stray away from religion, become more spiritual after a while. It's just a personal choice. And walking meditation, meaning I've learned how to sit in silence, walk in silence. Basically, the silence goes. It's not deny. It doesn't mean denying the trauma I went through now, but it means being in a situation where I can observe it without judgment. It took a lot of practice, but it's getting me there, and at least I'm free from insomnia. So I just want to conclude by saying every account I hear about Holocaust survivors, it's been an honor to learn. And one of my best friends is Alan Friedman, who's in Toronto. He knows I've spoken to him about some of my problems, and his dad, Arnold Friedman, account was a Holocaust survivor, and in fact, he has counseled me. So it's just to overcome some of my trauma of childhood. So thanks, Jeffrey. And
okay, thank you. And Fred, I want to ask you to unmute yourself, and perhaps you can tell us how you've been trying to heal yourself. And maybe you'll explain to the group about the documentary that you worked on.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So the question is, how do I heal myself? right, Jeffrey?
Yes.
I throw myself into social causes, into the community, into the world of volunteering and trying to help.
Maybe you can give a little background of your parents so that everyone can kind of quickly get up to speed as to who you are and why you're where you are.
Okay, both my parents are Holocaust survivors from Poland. My mother from Dąbrowa Górnicza, my father from Benjamin. They ended up beating each other in Bergen-Belsen after being liberated. They married a few months after they met. They came to Los Angeles in 1950, and I was born in 1954. And there were a lot of things that I was totally unaware of about my parents, about the Holocaust when I was early, when I was a young boy. And my parents didn't want to talk about it. They didn't talk about it. I didn't have the courage to ask them any questions. I knew it was a very hurtful subject and very touchy. I did hear my father constantly scream in the middle of the night, Gestapo, Nazis are coming, and it was a scream, and it awoke me from sleep. My mother, when I was a young boy, I would hear her cry in the other room hysterically. She wanted to end her life. She couldn't go forward. She couldn't take the pain any longer. It's not something somebody who's 5, 6, 7-year-old wants to hear from the mother. I wasn't sure exactly what was going on. I wasn't really aware of the Holocaust, but I was aware something did happen. My father would often counsel her to calm down. When he was off of work and not around, she would be on the phone with survivor friends, and she would do the same thing. She would just cry hysterically and carry on that she didn't want to live anymore. She just couldn't handle it. Fast forward to about 2015, I was asked to be a subject of a documentary by Donna Cantor. She learned that I was a child of 2 Holocaust survivors who did not know anything about my family members. My father's family, who his parents were murdered, 6 siblings were murdered. I didn't even know their names until I had to sit down my parents and actually ask my father. My father couldn't even talk about it. So it was my mother who answered my questions. If she didn't know something and she wasn't exactly sure, she would ask my father, and my father would nod. And then he would leak out the names of his siblings and his parents. And this is something I didn't even know until my 50s. I had no idea. And for some reason, when he said he had 2 sisters, I was floored. I don't even know why. I knew he had brothers. I didn't know their names. I didn't know how many. When he said he had 2 younger sisters, I was flabbergasted. And to learn their names, my mother asked him their names, and he told her, and then she told me. So the film that I did, it was to find photos of my grandparents. I had no idea what they looked like, and it was very important. 4 of my grandparents were murdered. I have a photo of one grandmother, and I was determined to find photos of them and learn about what had happened to them, and information about such as their birth dates and where they were born and what their occupations were, where they lived, and so on. So, and I believe that it was Kathleen who said what she does is to carry on the torch of remembrance. And that's one of my goals in this film, is that it's passed down to generation after generation after generation. So it's not forgotten.
What's the name of the film, Fred?
The presence of our absence.
It's available on Amazon, paid Amazon. Go ahead.
Well, paid Amazon, yeah, currently it's free on Tubi, Tubi. So it's easy to register on there.
If you want to watch a fantastic movie, Donna Kantner is a two-time Emmy Award winner, filmmaker and director. It is a beautiful film. Fred, Donna, and myself have presented the film to groups, and it is a beautiful film. And I do want to move on, Fred, but I think I wanted to make sure that your creativity and your hope and your healing, I think in many ways has come through this film. I have some type of kind of existential relationship with Fred because he and I are on the same pathway. I didn't know anything about my parents' path. And when I saw Fred's documentary film, it hit me like a lightning bolt. And I connected immediately with Fred, and Fred and I started to have a conversation, and which eventually led to programming. And frankly, just to give you a little bit of the inside baseball scoop, a lot of my programs come out of that type of experience. I watch a film, and Dana indicated I've now watched over 500 Holocaust films, which is kind of like, if you think about it, that's kind of like a bizarre way of spending COVID in isolation. You know, it's strange, but most of my learning has come through film, and then through direct contact, through connections on Facebook. And so Eva is a great transition because Eva's raising her hand over there, and we met the same way. But sorry, Fred, you were going to say something?
Yes, when I did the film, originally I didn't want to do it when I was asked, simply because it would be my first trip to Poland, which was very important to me, and I wanted to be alone with my thoughts and my emotions or whatever things stirred up inside me. But I was convinced to do it, and I want to say that I put my heart on my sleeve. With this, it's total 100% honesty. The emotions, my thoughts, are 100% real. That was extremely important to me. If you want to see it, you can Google my name, and then you can see the websites and where.
And Fred, while I have you on the, I want you to get a hold of Donna and Stephen, because Stephen is involved in a program. He's a minister in the South called the Matsua Project. Am I pronouncing that right? Matsiva Project, which Fred and Stephen went to Poland, and there's 2,000 Polish cemeteries that are in disrepair, or 1,200. I think the number somewhere reached 1,200. And Fred and Stephen and Donna, who's filming, are clearing the cemeteries. And I don't want to give away the story, but you've got to watch this film. So Eva, go ahead.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Thank you, everyone. Such touching stories, and there is so much that I can recognize myself, how I feel. As I mentioned at the very beginning, I'm a child of 2 Holocaust survivors. My mother was in Auschwitz. My father was in the Hungarian forced labor. We are originally from Czechoslovakia, but that region where my family is from became Hungarian. It was ceded to Hungary during World War II, or in 1938 or 39. Anyway, I grew up not having any grandparents. That was very painful to me because most of my friends were Christian. They all had grandparents. They all had a large family. So that was extremely painful, seeing the affection and the love between the friends with their grandparents. I grew up in a very loving family. My father lost his first wife and 3-year-old daughter in Auschwitz. So he met my mother after the war. They had a very good, happy marriage, and I had a very happy childhood. There was lots of laughter, lots of music, but also my parents often talked about their Holocaust experiences and about their family losing their loved ones. And I would overhear these stories. Since I was very little, I heard the stories of my parents. And it was very difficult to see the pain on their faces. And they were overprotective, very protective of me. We were very close, just the three of us. As an only child, we did everything together. If my parents were invited to their friends, they always took me along. We were inseparable. And I always said I grew up in a happy family, which is true. There was singing, dancing, music, everything. But only in my later years in United States, I realized that how much it impacted me, and what a warrior I have been. And I never forget an incident that I don't usually share. I shared with very few people.
You sure you want to do this? There's 100 people here.
Yes. When my parents lived very close to us, I was already married with 3 children, my husband and our 3 kids. And I was on my way somewhere, and I saw an ambulance going toward the neighborhood where my parents lived. I immediately changed, turned around with my car, and I was besides myself, what if the ambulance is going to my parents' home where they lived? And so I did, and unfortunately, I am a warrior, and I am doing this with my kids too. My kids don't like it if I often call them up, and if I am driving and I see an accident and I'm driving by, I have to call each of my kids. Now I don't tell them anymore, because I used to tell them. I just get so scared. I just wanted to make sure. I want to make sure you are okay. I don't tell them anymore because they say, Mom, they don't understand. So now I just call. I just want to know how you are. If the phone rings later in the evening, I get scared. How do I deal with it? What am I doing? I started years ago to do yoga, meditate, and during the pandemic, I started Tai Chi. But I think what helps, yoga is a huge part of my life, and I couldn't be without yoga. But I think what is the most helpful is the friendships that I created many years ago with people who also are children of Holocaust survivors. And we have so much in common. And we understand each other. And we support each other. And also, I live in Minneapolis, and there is a group called Children of Holocaust Survivors, Second Generation, and that's also a great support. So these are the things that I find helpful to deal
and
with.
one of the things I find helpful is that whenever I hear Ava speak, she sounds just like my mom. And it's really, really hard for me not to start crying when I hear Ava speak. So next is Esther. You have your hands raised. And Esther Gilbert, for those of you who may not have heard earlier, is the widow of Sir Martin Gilbert. We met each other online virtually And in
This is the first
December,
time we're meeting in person.
well, we're not quite in person, yes, through Zoom. But Esther will be presenting a program to our group in December, and we're really excited about that. So take it away, Esther. Give us your healing thoughts.
It's great to see you healed and back in action.
Thank you.
And for including me in this. This is serious goosebump material, listening to one person's story and another person's story. My experience is quite different, but what really has helped me to heal is to learn about what happened and how it happened and how these things develop and how the geography was influenced. And so I began by reading Martha's books, and eventually I did a project on using published survivor memoirs. So I got an idea of what the different areas were, and each time I started a memoir, I thought, this is someone who's survived. So there's hope there, and I want to learn how this person survived, what they went through, and that helped me a lot. And it's been a journey of trying to understand human nature and what we can learn from.
Do you have any, other than Martin, do you have any personal connection to the Shoah from your family?
Yes, my mother was the only survivor of her family. She came from a little town in northwest Ukraine called Sarny. And Martin and I were there 10 years ago visiting. She was lucky and managed for various reasons, which I can get into when I do my talk about, she managed to escape and get to the States before the Germans arrived in her town. So her trauma was this journey she took halfway around the world as a young woman of 23 and having lost her entire family. So I didn't have grandparents, but also I grew up in a little town in Idaho, and we were the only Jewish family. So aside from not having family, aside from not having Holocaust survivor who could connect and second generation who could connect, without any Jewish community. And that's been something that I've been sort of seeking and finding through my life. But my healing really was to understand what happened. I met, in 1988, I met Rudolf Verba, who had been one of the escapees from Auschwitz, with the news of what was going on. He escaped in April 1944.
There's a film of him.
A new one. I haven't seen it yet.
I have, yes.
Is it good?
Yeah, always good.
I got to know him quite well, and I met him about 6 months after my father died, and I was very close with my father. And I thought, this man has been through so much. How did you survive? And he said when he came to Auschwitz, he realized that this is real. He said people who came with the idea that, they were still living their previous lives and that this was some nightmare or something that was going to go away. He realized that this is real. And that helped me a lot during my life when I went through difficult times, and I realized it gives you the wherewithal to be able to adapt. If you accept a situation that is what it is, and if it's not, the best, you say, this is real, I have to accept it. What was before, and now I have to go forward in this new world. That's really helped me. So I've been very lucky. I've met amazing people through the work I did on survivor memoirs. It's called Holocaust Memoir Digest.
Can you put it into the chat for everyone so they can see it? And I want to just continue. What's interesting to me is we're living through a pandemic. And when it started in March of 2020, the first thing I thought, the first nanosecond that this happened is that how would my parents deal with it? And if they could get through the Holocaust, what the hell with TV, with take-in food, with Instacart am I complaining about? It was so helpful to kind of have that as a juxtaposition with my parents, you know, not having my mother. The only story that I've heard through someone else, my mother was transferred to Ravensbrück, and she was in the mess. She was to feed the SS guards, and they would throw rotten potatoes out, and she had to fight the German shepherds for the potatoes that were left over. And that thought came rushing to me when the pandemic hit, and it really has helped me month after month after month. And we're now still in the pandemic, we're not getting out. So every single day I have that German shepherd and my mother in my mind.